Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, May 22nd, 2025. All managers are present. Manager Hejmati will join us shortly. Is there any member of the public who is here about a matter not on the agenda? I think you guys are here for the permit. Then, before asking for a motion to approve the agenda, I'll just note that we will take up items 13 and 14 before 12 this evening. With that change, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Manager Maxwell
Second.
moves. Manager Olson seconds. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda has approval of the minutes of the May 8th board meeting and approval of the check registers for the general checking account, surety checking account, and wire transfers, and 3 resolutions. 25031 for approval of watershed-based implementation funding grant agreement, 25032 authorization to contract Sunram Construction for maintenance of Grays Bay Dam, and 25033 authorization to purchase replacement equipment for the real-time sensor network. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move approval.
I'll take a motion from Manager Hejmati, second from Manager Miller. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have a couple of items to mention. They both concern Minnesota watersheds. One is that, if I remember correctly, if I have the dates in my head, the resolutions have to be into them by the 2nd of June. And then there's a very fast turnaround. I think comments have to be back by June 12th, which is the day we have a meeting. But I dare say they'll take comments the next morning if we have them. So we'll just have a little bit of time to look at the resolutions, and we can put them in the board packet. And then the summer tour is on the 24th, 5th, and 6th of June, and we have a board meeting scheduled for the 26th. I hope we don't have to reschedule, but let me just take a straw poll. Who plans to go up to Roseau? Okay, so we'd have a quorum, and we might have time to drive back before the meeting, those are the people who go. So if it's okay with you, let's just leave that meeting where we had it already, June 26th. No objection? Okay, good, no change. Manager Miller, can you give us a report on Policy and Planning Committee?
Yeah, we had a report on the Land and Water Partnership, which we had earlier tonight in the board meeting, but the report in the prior to the board meeting was more complete than just a presentation. So it was well received. And then they presented the capital improvement program, which the committee is, Citizens Advisory Committee is going to study and make recommendations as they normally do.
Okay, and that was the CAC report.
Yeah.
Could you also give the Planning and Policy Committee
Oh,
report?
okay.
That's okay.
All right. I'm not wearing my
The order
hearing aids
doesn't
tonight
matter.
for some stupid reason. I guess I forgot them. We had a report presentation tonight on the Land and Water program, and it was a very good report, and we got a lot of good ideas out of it, and it's ready for prime time, but there was a lot of suggestions on how to make it even better, and not be restricted by traditions and current policies, because this could be a gateway to some very interesting projects in the future. So
It has been already. It's a wonderful program. Thank you. The upcoming meetings and events are ordinarily scheduled committee and board meetings, and in addition, the June 5th field trip for managers, CAC members, and district staff. That's at 1 p.m. I know the details will come out later. We can go then to item 9.1, which is permit 25041. Ms. Sanis presenting.
Good evening, President White and Board of Managers. Tonight, I will be briefing you on permit 25-041 for the reconstruction of the playground and sidewalk at Whittier Park in Minneapolis. This project is proposed by the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board and triggers the district's erosion control and stormwater management rules. The applicant is seeking a variance from Section 6 of the Stormwater Management Rule, which requires 2 feet of vertical separation from the 100-year high water level of the stormwater management practice and nearby building openings. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed this permit and have found it to be compliant with all district rule requirements except the section for which it's seeking a variance. I'll start off the presentation with the project background, followed by a walkthrough of the district's rule analysis. I'll then outline the variance request, followed by time for questions or discussion. The applicant is proposing the project in the city of Minneapolis, located in the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed, with the project location shown here in yellow. Zooming in a bit further, you can see the project location drains west via storm sewers into Lake of the Isles before draining south through the chain of lakes and ultimately into the Minnehaha Creek. The site has a recreation center and a playground on the northern section of the site, where the work is going to be occurring, and a ball field on the southern section of the site. You can also see the red roof of a school that's partially on this site and partially on the neighboring parcel. Here you can see another angle of the site with the playground in the middle and the rec center off to the right. The site currently drains through a series of catch basins, sending water west off-site. And in the proposed condition, the sewer pipes will still remain, but a filtration basin, shown here in blue, would be installed to treat the water before it enters the sewer. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board is proposing the reconstruction of the 2 existing playground areas, the surrounding sidewalk, and the installation of a basketball court. In the middle of the project area is the proposed filtration basin to treat the reconstructed impervious surface. The proposal is surface level work to redo the playground area and sidewalk without much excavation or grading. I'll now pivot to the district rule analysis for the project. Because the project disturbs more than 5,000 square feet of land and will be moving more than 50 cubic yards of soil, the erosion control rule is triggered. The applicant's erosion control plan proposes a construction entrance at the north side of the site near the existing parking lot, with perimeter control around the entire project area. Staff have reviewed the application for the erosion control rule and found it to be compliant with all rule requirements. And because the project is reconstructing impervious surface, the stormwater management rule is triggered. However, since the project doesn't increase hard cover, our rule requires a best management practice, or a BMP, and doesn't prescribe what kind or have any volume or rate control requirements for this project. However, the project is also subject to City of Minneapolis stormwater requirements, which in this case are more stringent than the district's. To meet all requirements, the Park Board is proposing a filtration basin as their BMP. The district engineer has reviewed the application and found it to meet all rule requirements except for Section 6, for which the Park Board is proposing or requesting the variance. Now that I've gone over the district rule analysis, I'll discuss the applicant's variance request. The applicant is requesting a variance from Section 6 of the Stormwater Management Rule. This rule requires 2 feet between the 100-year high water elevation, shown here in the figure, of a stormwater basin and the low opening of any structure, unless the structure is hydraulically disconnected from the basin. In this case, on these site plans to the right, you can see the filtration basin shown in green and the opening to the rec center in yellow. The high water level of the proposed basin and the nearby opening of the rec center has 0.8 feet of vertical separation, not the required 2 feet. So this is what the variance request is for. And as you know, for variance requests, the applicant needs to show that there's a practical difficulty, explore if the variance can be avoided, how their proposal differs from strict rule compliance, and if it shifts a burden onto others. The first criteria is the cause of the practical difficulty resulting in the need for the variance, and if the applicant played a role in creating it. The cause of difficulty in this case is that the site is very flat and the applicant is constrained by the existing building low opening and the existing site overflow elevation, both of which are fixed. And the applicant did not play a role in creating this difficulty. As you can see in this rough diagram of the site in the existing condition, as I mentioned, the site is very flat with less than a foot of difference between the rec center low opening and the lowest site overflow off to the west, meaning a basin anywhere on this site would be running into the freeboard constraints. In the existing condition, water is routed into the underground stormwater sewer and then flows off-site. The applicant is proposing to add a filtration basin, and since the nature of the work is just to reconstruct the playground, the building, site elevations, and stormwater system that I mentioned earlier are all staying the same. However, the need for the variance is that the district rule requires 2 feet of difference between that basin high water level and the rec center low opening, with the intent to protect structures from flooding. The site isn't adding any hard cover, so runoff volumes will stay the same. But to think of some worst case scenarios for flooding to the building, staff and district engineer, along with the park board team, looked at a few different scenarios. So, if the filtration basin became clogged, the water would go out over the emergency overflow and into the existing catch basin system, acting the exact same way as it does in the existing condition, so the basin doesn't add any flood risk in any way. If both the filtration basin and the stormwater system is clogged, there's still little risk to flooding because the site is graded slightly to drain west towards the road, and this condition would be no different than if the catch basin was clogged today. Additionally, the scenario that would need to happen to have the rec center be flooded is if 10 inches of water covered the entire site. So in any case, the addition of the filtration basin does not exacerbate flood risk to the building. And even though the basin doesn't increase flood risk, throughout the course of the application's review, the park board team and district staff and engineering team have had multiple meetings to explore alternatives in effort to achieve rule compliance. District staff have also coordinated with the City of Minneapolis's permitting team to understand their rule requirements and what alternatives would work for their permitting process as well. One of the natural questions is if the basin size could be adjusted to meet rule requirements. But to meet freeboard requirements with the basin would need to be extremely large, or if it was to be built deeper, it wouldn't be in compliance with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency requirements. The site also has contaminated soils, so deep excavation would require more over-excavation and off-site hauling of these contaminated soils. So larger project scope and a larger project cost as well. Another alternative was using a different BMP that would go inside the existing storm sewer and therefore have a lower high water elevation. However, the project is also being regulated under the City of Minneapolis's stormwater requirements, as I mentioned, which in this case are more stringent than the district's and require treatment for water quality, load reduction, and for rate control. An underground BMP would likely have less water quality benefit than a basin, so therefore not meet city requirements. And throughout conversations with the City of Minneapolis, they also expressed a policy preference for surface BMPs rather than underground BMPs, which is taken into account here as well. And in a similar vein to looking at alternative BMPs, we also discussed moving the basin underground. However, because of the contaminated soils that I mentioned, this alternative would also require excavation and further remediation of the contaminated soils, resulting in an expanded project scope and a much higher project cost. Extensive over-excavation can also risk mobilizing some of that contamination. And finally, the park board also intends the basin to be used as an educational feature, so moving the BMP underground wouldn't satisfy that aspect of the project goal as well. And then finally, both teams also explored moving the filtration basin to an alternative location to have the basin be further away from the rec center opening. However, in order to continue to capture the required runoff area to meet city requirements, the entire site would need to be significantly regraded to drain south. This extent of regrading would greatly change the scope and cost of the project, which is currently the construction and very surface level work. Also result in significant tree loss across the park and result in, again, the need to remediate for those contaminated soils. So due to the combination of the site constraints, city requirements, and the project scope, it was determined that there were no feasible alternatives that wouldn't result in a variance. Another variance criteria is the extent that the proposal diverges from the rule. The high water level of the basin and the low opening of the rec center has a separation of 0.8 feet as opposed to the required 2 feet, as I mentioned. However, I think it's helpful to note that this 2-foot requirement is a buffer beyond the 100-year flood event. So the project is proposing about half the buffer that the rule requires, and in the event of a 100-year flood, there is still that 10 inches of buffer above that before water would end up reaching the rec center. And again, the basin doesn't increase flood risk whatsoever. The rec center opening also isn't known to be a flood risk at this time, and the project isn't adding any hard cover, so district staff and engineer don't anticipate any future flooding in the location as well. And then the last variance criteria is if the requested variance would shift the burden onto any neighboring properties or the public. Again, the flood risk is slightly less than what currently exists, and the variance would not shift the burden onto others. So to summarize what I've presented tonight, the project proposes the reconstruction of the playground at Whittier Park, triggering the district's erosion control and stormwater management rules, for which it seeks a variance of Section 6 of the Stormwater Management Rule. Staff and the district engineer have reviewed the application and finds that it meets all rule requirements except for Section 6, which it's seeking the variance. So thank you, President White and Board of Managers, for listening to this briefing on permit 25-041 and the associated variance request. If you or the board have any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you, Ms. Sanas. Is there a motion to grant the
approval.
variance?
Second.
Okay, Manager Miller, Manager Sando. Any questions about the variance? I'm happy to approve the variance, but I have a question about how you can say they didn't create the problem. The park board built the building, owns the property, is fixing the playgrounds. Doesn't that equate to they created the problem?
I can, the site has got a school on it too, and a community center and a playground. It's probably the tightest site with more activities than any place
Oh,
in
I think
Minneapolis.
I have no problem with variance.
And it was, I think it might have been the first project where the park board and the school board built on the same site. And there was a lot of opposition to take, the houses there are rather modest in that neighborhood. And there was a lot of opposition to taking down the houses, so they restricted the site there's no way they could get any more activity on that half a block. And so there just isn't the room for anything else. It's just one of those things that they were dealing with a lot of community opposition and support, and you think we have trouble getting cooperation. This is the first time the park board ever worked with the school board to to jointly develop a site. So it was a real complex economic and community problem. You know, it was so. You know, what little bit of benefit we could get from an ideal situation, I think isn't worth the additional cost for the city, for us, or for us to push on the city.
So the school and the parks together built this building?
The school board built the school building, and
Okay.
the park board built the community center
Okay.
Yes, here I
and the
can
playground.
pull up the aerial view as well. You can see this parcel is the one that's owned by the park board, and then the neighboring parcel to the east, which the majority of the school is on, that's owned by the school district.
The long building, it looks like a shed, is the school building.
Gotcha.
What year was it built?
It was
Not
built in the
sure.
70s.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Yes, I wasn't sure about when it was built, but I think, President White, you have a good point that the park board built the project originally, but at this point, the applicant, the park board team who is proposing the project, did not create the site constraints. They didn't back themselves into the corner that are creating the practical difficulty for the variance proposed for you. But I think you make a good point that Park Board
Thank you.
built the
Mr.
building.
Whisker?
I think one way to think about that, President White, is it's quite possible when the building was built in the 70s and that low opening was put in, if it hasn't. It was done at a time when the flood elevation was lower, and
Mm-hmm.
they're not responsible, the park board, in this, for the regional. Probably happened before those flood known for a buffer.
Manager Olson?
How many times since it was built has the building been flooded?
Good question, Manager Olson. I am not aware of any flooding into this opening whatsoever. I know we talked to the city of Minneapolis about the surrounding area, just to get some context of the flooding, and they said that some of their preliminary modeling shows that there might be flooding surrounding in some of the area streets, but the area in question, there's no known flooding.
So in 2014, this was not underwater.
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Anything else? Manager Loftus?
I, to follow up on your point, President White, I don't have a problem with the variance either, especially, you know, they're not asking for a variance on the building, they're asking for ground improvement here. But I think, though, we got to be careful about how you talk about that rule. You know, there's an intention behind it, protect that structure. If they were building something new, they need to be aware of the risks of for their property, of building below it. I don't think it doesn't change, like you said, but there is intention behind that rule, and it's protect those properties. So hopefully there's not storage of valuables on the ground in there, or, you know what I mean? If they were adding an extension onto the building, that's when you'd say, look, no, you really, for your safety and property, you want to be built up here. But I don't have a problem with this. They're taking an existing condition and adding a stormwater improvement. They're not adding on to the There is a reason for it, and property is a public entity and changed, but they understand the risks, obviously. They've lived with the risks, and I don't think this.
I was just poking on the
Yeah.
rule
Yeah.
rather than the project.
Yeah, and thank you, Manager Loftus. I think you make a great point as well. I know we've talked a lot with the park board and kind of in conversation. I know in previous projects where this freeboard requirement has been in question too, there's times where we always make sure that the applicant is aware of the risks. In this case, if the risk is existing and not changing,
Right.
and especially since it's a public partner, there we have that communication as well. I know sometimes in past projects with private partners, we've also had to be part of like a maintenance declaration, but didn't feel that that risk was necessary to be added here.
Thank you. Mr. Whisker?
President White, Lewis just kindly reminded me that it might be worth noting for the record, Cliff Swenson with the park board here, so park board's in the questions for them.
All right, thank you. I'm satisfied.
Mr. Do you have one?
Yeah, I have a question that was I'm hoping that there are some, you know, the situation is such, I understand what's going on. What I'm thinking about is like what Jessica was saying, was the risk of flooding. But I hope that there's some plans for mitigating the risk, you know, some way to prevent or, you know, however they do it, so that if a flood occurs, that they do something, that they have a plan in place to minimize the losses, minimize the destruction that takes place. Floods are terrible, just you know, just. But
I'm
they're
seeing
unspeakably
nodding.
difficult.
I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay, they're just unspeakably difficult, and the consequences are really terrible. So I would, you know, I don't have any difficulty passing this, but I would highly recommend that there be mitigation plans that be put in place now to look at the worst case scenario and what do we need to do and what do we do, put inside the building or outside the building, and have it in place so that if a flood risk comes, we can act quickly. When the flood risk happens, we don't stop and say, oh my God, what are we going to do? You have it in place, know what you're going to do, and get out there and do it and minimize the damage.
Yes, thank you, Manager Hashmani. I think that's a great point as well. And I know part of the project, without wanting to expand the scope and major grading, since it's a limited project, but because of that they're aware of some of like these freeboard constraints, I know there's some light grading happening on the lower portion of the project site to try and do what they can with the site constraints to be able to alleviate some of the risk that has been
You know, I mean,
existing.
the constraints are the constraints, what can you do? But how can we mitigate it? And be prepared, so that if it happens, we minimize the damage.
I just wanted, I have no problem with the variance at all, just one quick question. A couple times you said there'll be no change in the hard surface. Before that said they're gonna build basketball courts. What are they gonna drill on grass or dirt?
Yes, good question, Manager Maxwell. Some of the areas that are currently concrete will be moved to be pervious grass areas, and then some of the areas that they're more reconfiguring the shape,
Oh, so,
but
yeah,
it's
they're
keeping
changing, okay,
overall
all right,
hard
so
cover.
still
Yeah.
gonna be- Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah, and yes, and overall still in the similar locations, but making sure that there isn't any increased hard
Yeah,
cover.
you weren't gonna improve their drilling over rocks, I didn't.
Yeah.
Mr. Meehan?
If you, the picture behind you, you can see that and they are kind of getting
Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And now I'd like a motion to approve the permit with the variances granted and the
Move approval.
conditions. Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager,
Who made the motion?
oh, I thought you had, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Was-
I didn't know I was recognized, okay.
Is there a second?
not
Manager
nearly
Loftus
well.
seconds. Any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Can you tell Mike Schroeder that we turned it down?
I'll send them a text.
Thanks.
We'll move to item 11, Resolution 25034. Mr. Whisker presenting.
Yes, thank you, President White. Item 11.1 is for the board's consideration of pay request number 4 from JTS Incorporated, the contractor for the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk, in the amount of $146,830.01. On advice of the project engineer for the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk, which is SRF, and in accordance with the general conditions of our contract with JTS, Section 1501, the board's recommended to not make payment on the request of this time. So I wanted to make that clear up front. If the board determines to not make the payment in accordance with the resolution and the recommendation, JTS will then get written notice, and that written notice will outline both the board's actions and the reason for those actions. Some of the reasons are outlined, of course, in the resolution that Mike Hammond had drafted. Those include what I think are the following key highlights. JTS was advised in May of 2023, some 2 odd years ago when the pay request was originally submitted, that the Watershed District would hold payment pending resolution of the widespread defects that had been discovered in JTS's construction of the boardwalk. And at that time, JTS understood and didn't object. Since then, JTS hasn't made any mention of pay request number 4 until April 2025, April of this year. So as we think about processing this, the pay requests are governed by the general conditions that are outlined in our contract with JTS in that section 15. And those conditions do provide that the board might apply a set off against a pay request or just deny it entirely if the work in the engineer's judgment doesn't conform to contract, which it doesn't, has corrective work that needs performing, which it does, and if the watershed has incurred costs necessary to respond to defective work or has incurred liquidated damages. All those things are true in this instance. So Since SRF, the project engineers recommended that because of the defective work, we decline payment in full. Corrective work is required. The watershed has accrued liquidated damages and other costs that approximate $200,000. The board is recommended by resolution to deny.
Thank you, Mr. Whisker. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Maxwell, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Hejmadi, any discussion or questions? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 13 is board issues, inquiries, or ideas. Anything that managers wish to submit this evening? Then I'll move to the staff update. Mr. Whisker.
Thank you, President White. A few updates this evening. One, I think you knew this was coming, but we have the actual official award here. I should have had this on President White's portion of the desk, but the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership granted the watershed an award for its collaboration with the National Weather Service and Hennepin County on the forecast rainfall measurement and then watershed response system, our ResNet system, and how that information both informs dam operations and then local emergency managers and responders in a changing climate. So I think it was the last meeting while we were all here conducting business that, oops, I just broke it. We'll have to submit for replacement. Becky and Brian were off having a nice dinner and accepting, so they can provide color commentary on the meeting. They brought back the program. I think it was well attended, well received. We saw some old colleagues and friends. Brian Shackleton was there cheering us on from the stand, so he asked me to tell everybody.
That's wonderful. Did you want to add anything, Brian or Becky? Oh, I'm glad you could go. It's a beautiful award.
I
Beautiful.
think it's an iceberg.
I think so too.
Next up, we've had some community connections. We forecast these were coming up, but just to report back out, Rachel Baker and I presented this Wednesday at the Long Lake City Council meeting. This was mentioned in committee, outlined the Long Lake Creek Roadmap and the next steps that are being taken, leveraging that $170,000 in state grant funds to identify opportunities that would bring regional stormwater into downtown Long Lake. It's an interesting geography relative to the lake because downtown Long Lake is the most urbanized section of the watershed, that sub-watershed. And so as a result, it delivers the highest load per area to the lake. So hopefully we find some good opportunities. We got a really warm reception from Mayor Minor and the council. We secured a resolution of support for the work. And it was great. Mayor Minor made note that Rachel's family has a history of civic leadership, with her dad being the former mayor. And I think he made some really nice comments on how appropriate it is that she's now working within her capacities of the district to restore the waters of Long Lake. We were also joined by friends in the audience there. We had Janet Schaefer, a CAC member, and her husband, Marty Schneider, both former mayors of Long Lake, so it was like we were among royalty. Former Mayor Schneider said he enjoyed the presentation. It was extremely informative and has invited us to present it to the local Chamber of Commerce. So some follow-up there that was generated, and a lot of gratitude from Long Lake for our leadership on that. While that was happening, Samantha presented to the Tangletown Neighborhood Association on the Minneapolis partnership, and she was joined by Councilmember Koski. I think that went very, very well. Just a summary overview of the watershed's work, some questions about Grays Bay Dam, the burgeoning partnership in Minneapolis, and Councilmember Koski passed along a lot of nice words too. Just noted how catalytic the Watershed District's leadership has been in forming the Minneapolis Water Partnership and all the good things that are to come. Next, I wanted to note there's been some efforts underway to establish 2 new lake improvement districts on Lake Minnetonka for both Harrison's Bay, which sits just south of Jennings, and then Stubbs, a little bit to the northeast in Orono. For background, and I'm not an expert on lake improvement districts, but I understand Minnesota statute allows local citizens to petition for the formation of a LID, a lake improvement district, to address lake issues that aren't addressed through other governance structures. I think if approved, and maybe Bill or other lake managers could correct me, I think Harrison's and Stubbs, if they were approved, would join two others, Carmen's and St. Albans, that already exist as lake improvement districts. From our monitoring, neither the formation of Harrison's or Stubbs, and maybe they share something in similarity to the others, are coming along without controversy. There's some residents that are for, and some residents that are opposed. Stubbs recently had an informational meeting at the City of Orono. It was a presentation made by the Lake Minnetonka Association. Pretty strong emphasis on herbicide applications to invasive plants. And there's some public opposition on the record there revolving around what the gentleman who's representing the public perceive as a lack of need, data-driven decision-making, and transparency. I mention that because Harrison's Bay leadership has sought support from Minnehaha Creek Watershed District in forming. That's Sherry Wallace. She also sits on our Citizens Advisory Committee. Becky's had a chat with Sherry and just let her know that we generally view lake improvement districts as more of a local issue. It's largely outside of our scope, and just given the mixed sentiments, we've politely declined support. I think Sherry was very understanding and is forging ahead with the Mound City Council. Since then, representative of Stubbs and the LMA have reached out seeking support as well in their process with the City of Orono, and we plan to take a similar approach. But given the recent council meeting, I just wanted to get that on the board's radar. That's something that Becky and I plan to handle before the weekend, since we heard from the LMA and the Stubbs representative just a little bit. So, any questions on lake improvement districts? Those are coming along. Okay. And then I'll finish with water levels. Been a bit of a boom-bust spring already. We had warm, dry weather. May 16 to May 20th, we saw the Minnetonka levels drop from 929.25, about 0.2 of a foot, all the way down to 929. So 0.4 of a foot below ordinary high. Since then, if you've been looking out the window, it's been pretty cool and rainy. We had some significant storms drop some precipitation, and we've accumulated across the watershed about 3 inches of rain in the last several days. We got 2 inches in 24 hours out at the Hennepin Mesonet site that sits on Mud Lake, so some pretty significant rain. That saw the western tributaries like Painter and 6 Mile rise approximately a foot in stage in 24 hours, which obviously then drives inflow into the lake on sort of a delayed, a little bit of a time lag. So we have seen Minnetonka rebound. It's up to 929.35, so just about 0.05 below OHW, so it's effectively at OHW. Extended forecast looks pretty warm and dry, so it'll probably slowly start tapering down. We've been running Grays Bay Dam between base flow, 12 CFS and 20 CFS, which is what it's called for when the lake is low and dry. The creeks had the same experience. It peaked up at 217 cubic feet per second and is way back down. Probably over the next 3 to 4 days towards 30. It's sitting at 100 CFS right now. And the water level team pushed an update out through mail, I think last week, May 16th. So back and forth on the water levels. Through that same period of time, we've been working with Hennepin County and National Weather Service to finalize our plans for the Flood Response Plan Summit, which we're going to be hosting digitally next week with about 30 to 40 participants. Hopefully, I think we're sitting 25 to 28 right now with RSVPs trickling in before the weekend. Our plan there is to review forecasts for the year, just remind people where we sit in water balance. But then principally, our focus is to outline the role and the value that the 3 partners deliver for local emergency managers before, during, and after flood events to drive role clarity. In conversations with the county, I learned a lot. They believe the meeting that we're having around value and roles is more important than ever, given the changes they've seen to what the Stafford Act, which is federal law guiding cost contribution for disaster relief and emergency assistance. And I wasn't tracking this, so it's been a great learning opportunity with Hennepin Emergency Management. Their assessment is that the costs per capita threshold, the damage costs per individual in the community that trigger federal assistance have been increased 400%. So they recently saw, for example, a flood in Washington caused 2 times the amount of damage costs per capita that would have been funded in the past night. And I think you've seen some of that with the tornadoes and made the national news. So that's of concern for emergency managers. I think making things more challenging, I learned that state funding for these same disasters are actually pegged to the federal Stafford Act. So those go up unless there's a legislative change in accordance with the Stafford Act. So there's going to be gaps in state funding unless there's legislative change. And asking if that's on the docket, perspective there was the legislature's got limited bandwidth and there's so many changes happening that states are having to respond to. It's not quite sure how this is going to sit out and where it sits in queue. So I think communicating the value that we do provide, and from the county's perspective, making sure people are ready and building community resilience and they know what their role is more important now. So that's going to be a key message that the county is wanting to deliver, and why they've led the convening process. Even though it was our idea, they've distributed this to all of their emergency management contacts and are driving, getting ready to the table. So
I like that.
yeah, it's great. So they'll be providing kind of the keynote and the intro, and then our value delivery sits inside this whole partnership. But the county does have a strong role before, during, and after, whereas we really largely only have a role on the front end system, just being brokering of information. I think it's going to be maximally effective to deliver that message in that kind of partnership. And then any feedback we get on portals that we're building into our dashboard for ResNet, so community leaders can be even more responsive. We'll be bringing that back into our finalizing it. Not July. So that's the rundown for the.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Whisker?
Okay.
Then, thank you very much. Our next business are the discussion items under 12.1 and 12.2, and expecting to move into closed session. Mr. Smith, would you state the reason?
Madam President, turning to the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk and the dispute with JTS Construction. As you know, this is an ongoing business dispute with this private construction firm. They have served on us a draft lawsuit complaint. And so we would recommend that the board go into closed session for the purpose of getting confidential legal advice about litigation strategy and dealing with this dispute and the threatened lawsuit.
Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Manager Olson, a second.
Second.
Manager Hachmadi, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We will take a moment to let everyone relocate. We are now at item 12.2, 325 Blake Road Restoration and Redevelopment.
I think we should go into closed session.
Let's let Mr. Smith tell us the exact reason, and then I'll take your motion.
Madam President, we would recommend the board go into closed session for the purpose of getting confidential legal advice on litigation strategy in the lawsuit brought by Alatus Development LLC against Minnehaha Creek Watershed District and the City of Hopkins, which is currently pending in Hennepin County District Court.
Thank you.
So moved.
Is there a second? Manager Maxwell, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are in closed session. We are in open session, and the meeting is adjourned.